What's going on, guys? Today I have a new tier list video for you guys where I'm going to be covering all of the Resident Evil games, or at least all of the important ones. I don't know if I missed any, but if I did, let me know down in the comments below. Now, why don't we start with the few Resident Evil games that I actually have never played before, and I will put them in the never played it bracket, seeing as I can't actually judge those properly. Now that I've gone ahead and put all those games in the never played it tier list, I can now get started on the actual tier list itself, which I am going to be starting with the original Resident Evil 2. There isn't much really to say about this, but it's the first Resident Evil game that I ever played, so it was my introduction, and not only that, but it was truly a good Resident Evil game, so it deserves to be in the masterpiece tier list. Growing up as a fan of Resident Evil, I always find myself going back to play Resident Evil 2 at least once every year, so it definitely deserves to be up there in the masterpiece tier. But next up we have the original Resident Evil 1, and that one I'm just going to have to leave in the okay tier list. It's not terrible, and as a matter of fact the game is actually kind of easy to beat if you know how to understand tank controls and fix camera angles and whatnot. But regardless, the game has its flaws. I've played the director's cut version, and there's a such thing as yellow fine, which really throws you off because as a player of Resident Evil, you think fine means that you're okay, but in reality, yellow fine can kill you with one bite of a zombie. And there's just little stupid things like that that just make you realize Resident Evil 2 is so much improved on the gameplay part. Moving on, we have a game that has way better gameplay mechanics, that is Resident Evil 2 Remake. This one I have to put in the masterpiece tier list. I've heard a lot of good reviews of this game, so I'm pretty sure a lot of people that are watching this video would agree with Resident Evil 2 Remake being at the masterpiece tier list. I don't like it as much as the original because the original holds that nostalgia factor for me still, which is something that I don't think I can ever break. But Resident Evil 2 Remake is definitely one of my most played Resident Evil games. I have about 220 hours on the game, and that is mostly coming from me trying to speedrun and get the best time possible. So for the first 2 or 3 years that Resident Evil 2 Remake was out, I was trying to learn all the little ins and outs of the game and trying to master it the best that I possibly could. So I do like the game very, very much, but I haven't played it in a little while, to be honest. Moving on, we have Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Now this one I like a lot, so I'm definitely going to put in the masterpiece tier list. But I've been playing this game a lot lately on my PS3, which I have the PS1 version of the disc, but my PS3 being backwards compatible, I'm able to play it on there. You are able to unlock weapons to use in the main campaign by playing Mercenaries, which I think is a really fun idea and has gotten me not only into the gameplay itself more, but actually playing Mercenaries and just everything about Resident Evil 3 in general. Even unlocking costumes has been really fun for me to do lately. I played the original Resident Evil 3 very briefly when I was a kid, but I always found myself struggling to understand the game. Now that I'm older, I'm able to process the gunpowder and everything else about the game, and it seems to be actually a lot more fun than when I was a kid. Next up we have Resident Evil 3 Remake. This one I don't really have much to talk about. I've only played about 80 hours worth of the game, so I spent a little bit of time on it, and if I remember, the only thing I really truly liked about it was the cutscenes they had. Other than that, gameplay-wise, it was very short. The next one we're going to be talking about is the original Resident Evil 4. This one is definitely going to be a masterpiece one for me, that's for sure. This was one of the very first Resident Evil games that I ever played growing up, so this one definitely holds some nostalgia factor for me as well. But that is not only the only reason I put it in the masterpiece tier list, it is actually a masterpiece of a game itself, and I'm pretty sure a lot of Resident Evil fans watching this could agree with me on that statement. This was the first game to use the over-the-shoulder camera angle, and it inspired a lot of survival horror games, so it's definitely debatably up there as one of the best survival horror games all time. While we're on the topic of Resident Evil 4, I might as well move on to Resident Evil 4 Remake, which I will go ahead and put in the great category along with Resident Evil 3 Remake. I didn't play it a lot, but for what I did play of it, I did enjoy it. I only have about 45 hours on the game, so definitely don't go in the comments and hate me. I know I need to play it more. Now we have Resident Evil 5, which growing up has always been one of my personal favorites. I gotta put that one right up there in the masterpiece tier, right up there with RE2 and RE4. But Resident Evil 2 definitely takes the cake for me. With the nostalgia factor being huge, that one has definitely gotta be my favorite, with Resident Evil 5 coming in at a close second. This next Resident Evil game is definitely one that got hated by the fan base as it lacked the survival horror feel that most Resident Evil games have. I can see where the fans are coming from when they have their complaints about Resident Evil 6, but for me, I actually went on to enjoy the game for the most part. I definitely played it when I was younger when the game was brand new, and I only went through the campaigns about once with each character, but for what I remember, I did enjoy just about all of the game. Next one we have is RE7, which I'm gonna have to put in the OK tier list. I actually only played this game once and beat it. It came out back in 2017 when I was 14 years old, and that's the only memory I have of the game. The next one in the Ethan Winters storyline though is Resident Evil Village, and this one I'm gonna have to put in the great category, because this one I actually thought was quite better than Resident Evil Biohazard. Now, I said that I didn't have much memory of Resident Evil 7, and I said that I only played it once, and there's a good reason why that is. That's because I actually didn't enjoy it that much. But Resident Evil Village was a great follow-up, and I actually enjoyed the game a lot more, and I did enjoy the third-person, over-the-shoulder camera angles that they added in one of their updates, because that is more my style than the first-person camera angles. I found myself getting a lot more invested in the storyline of Resident Evil Village than I was when I played Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. And from what I've seen from reviews of the fans, I think most people enjoyed Village over Biohazard, so I'm pretty sure most of you will agree with me putting Resident Evil Village above Biohazard on this list. I've now talked about all of the mainline Resident Evil games, at least Resident Evils 1 through 8, including their remakes. So now we'll be going back in time a little bit, and we'll be moving on to Code Veronica X, which as you see I want to put in the great category right at the top, but I was struggling to get it there. I truly love Code Veronica X and always had a lot of fun playing it, but there is a couple of small flaws that the game has, one of them being the fact that it should have been one of the mainline Resident Evil games. In my opinion, this game should have been Resident Evil 3, because it was following up the story that Claire had in Resident Evil 2 and her mission to find her brother Chris. Also, the boss fights in this game are really hard to do, so it makes it really hard to want to replay this game, and if anything, I find myself playing this game with the infinite herb glitch. Which yes, the infinite herb glitch is very much a thing in Resident Evil Code Veronica. Look it up if you want to beat Code Veronica X the easy way. How many of you guys have played Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City? I've only played it a few times before, so I'm gonna have to put it in the terrible tier list. Now, I can definitely tell you that it doesn't seem like it's that bad of a game. I haven't played it in like 9 or 10 years easily, so my memory of it is very faint, and I think for even what I've played, I haven't played very much of it, so I'll tell you I probably haven't progressed very far into the game ever. I'm gonna put it in the terrible tier list just for the pure fact that if I would have liked the game, I'm pretty sure I would have still owned it and I would have still been playing it, so that might have a lot to say about the game. But I want you guys to let me know down in the comments, was that game good or not? Now to move on to a game that I can tell you guys, at least from my experience, is a good game, and that is Resident Evil Dead Aim. Some of my oldest memories of playing Resident Evil going back would be games like RE2, RE4, and Code Veronica X, but Dead Aim also holds a lot of nostalgia factor as it was also one of the first couple of Resident Evil games that I had ever played. The cutscenes and the story to this game are a little bit stale, and you can tell that they were trying to recreate the characters of Ada Wong and Leon Kennedy in some shape or form. But in my opinion, the gameplay is super fun, and so therefore I'm gonna have to put it in the good tier list. Now with Resident Evil Outbreak, I almost wanted to put it in the never played it category, but I actually have played it a very, very few amount of times before. See, back when Resident Evil Outbreak was newer and Outbreak File 2 had already come out, I had gotten Outbreaks File 1 and 2 at GameStop, or at least my dad did. And of course, we started with Outbreak File 1, but when we loaded up the game and we were in that first bar scene, the entire game was setting up to be something that we realized wasn't anything that we could relate to. With the lack of fan-favorite iconic Resident Evil characters, it became really hard for me at a younger age to really dive into this game and really enjoy it for what it is. So unfortunately, we ended up getting rid of Outbreak File 1 and 2 and taking it back to GameStop, with me never getting the chance to check out Outbreak File 2. I forgot to talk about RE1 Remake while I was on the topic of the original Resident Evil 1, but now that I've realized, we might as well just start talking about it now. I know for many people of the Resident Evil franchise, they like to say that this is one of the best survival horror games ever made, and I can actually agree with that, even though I put this in the great category and not the masterpiece. There's quite a few elements to this game that can easily get me killed and have to force me to restart my game. If you don't have enough resources or healing items to take on a hunter, then there's a pretty good chance that you will end up just dying. And there's also a lot of boss fights that if you're playing on a harder difficulty can be really difficult to make it past, like the yawn fight. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about when I was referring to Code Veronica X and I was saying that the game is pretty difficult to beat and that it forces me to play with the infinite herb glitch. So just like Code Veronica, this game is also pretty hard to beat, and therefore I'm gonna have to put it in the great category and not the masterpiece tier list. Now moving on to debatably Resident Evil's most underrated game in my opinion, Resident Evil Revelations 2. I find this game to be a lot more fun and chill than Resident Evil's Code Veronica X and RE1 Remake. Of course, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, this game can be a pretty easy experience to just go through and play and appreciate the story. I really hope they continue on the idea of the Resident Evil Revelations game because I really like the raid mode and just everything else about Resident Evil Revelations 2. I never did end up playing the first Revelations game, but because of Revelations 2 and how much I enjoyed playing that game, Revelations 1 will have to be the next Resident Evil game that I check out for the first time. We are now on to our final 4 games to talk about, and now I'll be moving on to Resident Evil Reverse, which if you guys know anything about me, this is going to be a masterpiece game in my opinion. Resident Evil has had their experience with online multiplayer games like Operation Raccoon City, which I wasn't able to enjoy that much. And after seeing videos of Resident Evil Resistance, I was never willing to actually check the game out myself. But Resident Evil Reverse I think was where they really hit their mark with online multiplayer games, even though they kind of took our money and ran and didn't continue to update this game. I remember originally hearing about this game and being totally down because I wanted to try and master this game and be one of the best. And after this game has already been out for easily a year and a half now, I can easily say that this game creeped into my top 5 most favorite Resident Evil games, and not only that, but easily one of my most played Resident Evil games of all time. I'm a huge fan of the classic survival horror Resident Evil games and the Call of Duty franchise, so this game is something I've wanted for a very long time. If you're somebody that likes those 2 games, I'd highly recommend checking out Resident Evil Reverse. Alright, let's keep things moving along as we're at the final 3. Now we're going to be talking about Resident Evil Gun Survivor, and this one I just put in the OK tier list because that is a pretty good word to describe this game. It is simply just okay. So back in the year 2020, when we all had nothing to do, I set out to try and play every Resident Evil game that I had yet to play, and I started with one of the oldest Resident Evil games that I had never played before, and it was this one, Resident Evil Gun Survivor. Now fast forward 4 years later and I've beat the game several times, but after you go through and do it a certain amount of times, it kind of just becomes repetitive, so I'll have to leave it at okay. Seeing as Resident Evil 0 is the prequel to Resident Evil, I should have started with that, but oh well. Resident Evil 0 is going right at the top of good, in my opinion. It is a very good game, and that is a good word to explain it. Most people's complaints about this game is the lack of having an inventory box, but that isn't really enough for me to go ahead and say that it changes the fact that this is just an all-out fun game to play. If you're somebody that can really get into the history of Resident Evil like myself, the cutscenes are very fun to just sit back and watch, and not only that, but being able to switch between Rebecca and Billy is a pretty fun option that they don't really implement much. To finish off my tier list, we have Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles on the Wii. Going off of gameplay, I'm gonna have to put Umbrella Chronicles in the terrible tier list. Even though I have very little knowledge or memory of this game, I can tell you that from what I've seen and from what I have played, it's pretty much like Gun Survivor, except you cannot even move. You pretty much just have your crosshair and you just shoot what's in front of you, and then the game moves you on to the next part. So if you're a big fan of action shooter arcade games, then I would recommend checking out a game like Umbrella Chronicles. But when you think about what classic survival horror is and what OG Resident Evil really is, this game doesn't really shape up to feel like what a Resident Evil game should feel like. But there we have it, guys. That is my 2024 Resident Evil tier list. One thing I always like to do after a tier list video is review every game that I have, starting from the top and ending with the bottom. So starting in the masterpiece tier list, we have OG Resident Evil 2, followed up with Resident Evil 5, 4, 3, 2 Remake, and Reverse. So now for the great category, we have Rev 2, CVX, RE1 Remake, RE3 Remake, Village, RE4 Remake, and RE6. In the middle, we have Resident Evil 0 and Dead Aim, followed up with the OK tier list, which has OG RE1, RE7, and Gun Survivor. Then we have the terrible tier list, which consists of Operation Raccoon City, Outbreak, and Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles. Also, of course, there's the games that I have never played before. I hope all of you guys had as much fun watching this video as I did making this video. Tier list videos are always some of my favorite videos to make, so leave a like on this video if you guys want more, because I definitely want to make some more going into the future. If you guys got any future Resident Evil video ideas, leave those down in the comments below and I'll make sure to do those immediately. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video tomorrow. Peace.